and like somebody will like walk up behind you and say, and as he approached the woods, a deep fog.
Man, if you don't back up.
And it has Kyle's voice.
Oh gosh.
I was thinking about the fight I just had with my wife. Why was she so derogatory towards me?
Hey there, internet people. Welcome to another episode of Super Agile Bros. You already know what it is. A show about everything and nothing. And as always, yes, I clearly can't speak. You got the boys in here. We got Steve. Steve, say hello.
I'm just going to repeat the oh no. Oh no.
Oh no. And of course, we got the boy Kyle in the building. Kyle.
Hey, everybody.
So it's, it's the trio, how we do it. But before we get started, today's going to be a really cool episode. We're going to be talking about single player games, particularly story focused games. And are they good? Maybe you already know the answer to this, but, want to give a shout out to a few people who've been really supporting our podcast, from the beginning, giving us a lot of great feedback and love and sharing, their thoughts about our episodes and, talking to us about the topics and giving us suggestions. I want to give a shout out to Michael V. You know who you are. Particularly this episode is kind of dedicated to you because you threw out a few different topics you wanted us to talk about. And this is one of them. And so we wanted to make sure to give you some shine out there. Shout out to Rob A. You know who you are as well. One of my best friends from back in the day. I really appreciate you, supporting the show, giving your feedback. Me and him talking about the show even offline. So that's been cool. Shout out to Sheldon and Devontae of the podcast Prime 1 Billion. There are also some podcasters. They talk about Marvel movies, Marvel Cinematic Universe, all that jazz. But Sheldon and Devontae have been supporters of the podcast from day one. And I just want to say thank you. And finally, shout out to a new friend of ours. Met him on Reddit recently. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but it's Intal on YouTube. INTAL. He has a podcast. Go subscribe to his channel. Check him out. Really cool dude. And goes by Gazatris on Reddit. So thank you for checking out our podcast, commenting on videos, and just being overall supportive. Definitely check out his podcast, INTAL, Intal, on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get into it. Guys. So today we're going to talking. Yes, we're going to be talking about story-based games, single-player games. So out the gate, I mean, we can ask the binary question: are they good? Like from y'all's perspective, do you feel like those games are good? Something that's worth your time, worth your effort? What do you guys think? I guess Steve, what do you think about single-player games, particularly story-focused single-player games?
This is great. We were talking about earlier. We were talking about thumbnails, and we were talking for like a YouTube channel, and we were talking about not catchphrases, like subtitles and stuff. Subtitles. And I was like, I don't want to be clickbaity. And then we have this ultra clickbaity topic: are single player games good?
Hey.
But we're gonna. I think we'll have a good conversation. But yeah, the short answer. I do think they're good. I do think they're worth your time. The way I see it is games are essentially broken up into art versus entertainment versus like hanging out with your buds. And some games might kind of like, toe the line of multiple things. But in terms of like single player games, I usually think of that as like, oh, games are like an art form. And again, the answer to the question, I guess, would just be, is it to your taste? And do you want to spend your time experiencing art, or would you rather spend your time kicking a virtual football?
You heard it here first, folks. Football is not an art.
Ooh, you trying to get some hands thrown at you.
I mean,
Steve said, hey.
No. I'm talking about football games. Like other games that are decidedly not, I would say, artful. Like any of the Nintendo sports games, like those, actually a lot of Nintendo games are really about like the experience, like the gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess even the games I look down on, like the FIFAs and the Maddens, I guess that's also what they're about. But they're definitely not story based. So I wouldn't say that they're
They got
artistic.
the career modes now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that bring a tear to your eyes.
We'll come back around to that because I want to keep that in focus. But Kyle, what do you think?
Oh yeah,
is they good?
Is they be
Is
good?
they is or is they ain't
Good.
So first off, I gotta defend our loyal suggesters out there, calling their suggestion clickbait. They asked for this, and we are delivering, and they gonna click it, so it is bait. But that wasn't the point. Secondly, to answer the question with a question. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
I think the short answer is no.
No, you
Single player
don't.
games are not good. They are great.
No, single player story focused games, not single player games. Single player story focused.
Story focused games.
Yeah, they're personally my favorite genre out of all of them. So yeah, I'm extremely biased against single player story focused games. If you were to ask me, I love them.
Does
very
that
much.
mean that your least favorite games are not story focused? They're other single player or other multiplayer games.
Yes. Just by, if I have to do some sort of tier list, yes. But I don't know if I'd be able to classify my least favorite just from genre alone. I'd probably be similar to yours, in simulation style games with the Madden and all that. But yeah, I'm trying to answer Brad's question, man.
Man.
I can ask questions.
No, I mean, no, that's
I'm
fair.
a curious man.
I mean, okay, so I'm very surprised that you guys answered this as...
What's your answer, Brad?
Well, this is... My answer is this.
Oh.
My answer is I'm surprised that you guys answered it so kind of... Like I think there's such a nuance in this question, like, that there is not... I think the answer is, like, well, Steve kind of said it. Yes, kind of, sort of. No, kind of, sort of. And
That's exactly what I said.
I think the truth is that, like, I can name a lot of single player story games that are not that great, right? Because, execution is a part of it.
Fair
but
enough.
also I think there are some games that I believe really think that their story is more important and interesting than they are. Like, and they
They're pretentious.
really... Yeah, they're pretentious, and they
Yeah.
really try to put it in your face. They really force you to digest the story when really the focus should be the gameplay, right? Like, the focus should be the good part of it, And I think, on the other hand, there are games that do the opposite, but, like,
Yeah.
I feel that there's no way you could blanket yes or no this, but I do think that, like in many ways, we should talk about what makes a good game. Right, a good single player story focused game, because I think that will answer the question even more thoroughly. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. Yeah.
Like out the gate, and I want to start here because this is what I think of when somebody says story focused single player games. I don't think of games like, God of War, or even like, I guess we just had a podcast on this, Hades. Hades to me feels like a story focused game. Maybe I'm wrong. What do y'all think differently? I mean, it's definitely gameplay focused, but at least the first half, I don't know, because it goes against what I believed about it.
I would think that God of War is a story-based single player game.
Yeah, the newest one, maybe the newest one.
Oh yeah, the newest one. Can't say.
Well, I mean, the older ones, they were arcadey, but they were still pretty heavy as far as story was concerned.
Yeah, true. Like, so okay. I wanted to ask y'all about walking simulators, or at least maybe that's a derogatory term to that whole genre, but that's the term that best.
I don't know.
Gameplay in service of story.
Yeah, like games where you don't really do anything other than walk around and interact with the environment and like read notes, or like the Gone Homes, or the you name it. Like what else?
Ether one.
Esther, which is like the OG. walking simulator. So yeah, so what do you guys think about walking simulators? Like just story games, like purely story, very little gameplay in general.
I think that they, in my opinion, they barely constitute as games. Like, I understand why they're having to be called games, just because of the way the platform exists. They're interactive experiences where you're either, at a computer holding a controller. So by default, because it's not a movie or a graphic novel, it has to be a game. But I think beyond that, I don't think they're actually should be considered games. Like, I feel like they should have their own type of, genre,
Interactive
I guess.
movie.
Yeah, so that that walking simulator doesn't become a derogatory term, because you can't classify them with actual games.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really understand the draw. I'm like, if I'm only experiencing a story, if there's no gameplay, if I'm constrained, like I don't play a lot of these games, so I don't know. But like, if I'm constrained and I can't do what I want in the game and place and have it be fun, and I just kind of have to follow along the story, then I'm kind of like, what's the point? I'd rather watch it or read it. Like, what do I really gain by holding a controller and pushing forward for 2 hours?
Well, that's an interesting thought, because if and you have a PlayStation, you have PlayStation Plus, right, Steve? Or maybe you don't. You do.
It ran out recently.
It just ran out. If you haven't, you should play Gone Home. Have you played that, Kyle?
No.
Gone Home?
I have.
Yeah. So the reason I say that is because, in defense of walking simulators, I kind of feel like Gone Home is one of those experiences that is like the best form of walking simulator. And I do feel that it's a game because, yes, it's not heavily interactive, but they have like almost little mini games from time to time. But it's kind of telling the narrative through the mini game, and the mini games don't necessarily have a win-lose scenario. The one I'm thinking of is like the fish section. I'm not going to really share anything other than that. There's like a fish section, factory, and like it's almost a game. It's like it has like a twin stick shooter in there, like not twin stick shooter, like a twin stick kind of gameplay, and it's telling a narrative at the same time, and the visuals are changing, and it's all this cool stuff. Like, yeah. I feel like that is what walking simulators mean to be, like a game where it's kind of more, I think you were saying it earlier, Steve, like it's artistic, but you couldn't engage with this story without playing it, like, because I feel like there's no way you could do Gone Home in a standard video movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the way that they handled Gone Home, like the medium for Gone Home, in my opinion, was like, it's perfect for the narrative, and I think the only thing that it maybe could possibly be otherwise is just a book, because of how subtle it is. But I mean, I guess I still hold, even after playing that game, I don't consider it to be a game necessarily. Like, yeah, you interact with things, and I do remember, like, there were, I wouldn't call them puzzles, but I mean, like, somewhat like escape room elements. Like, you'd interact with something, and that'd give you access to something else, but you weren't necessarily figuring anything out.
Well, I'll say this. Now that you say that, I do feel like there's a lot more puzzles in that than, like, okay, you go to a certain room, but you have to interact with a certain thing in order for another thing to happen. And like you said, escape room, that's a game, right? An escape room's a game, right?
Yeah, I think escape rooms are, but I was saying it's kind of escape room adjacent, I guess, because escape rooms are so intentional about this plus this equals that, or this is associated with that, while Gone Home felt, I guess, more arbitrary.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I never played Gone Home. I think maybe it's unfair. In my head, I've kind of constructed a straw man for a walking simulator, which has like no gameplay mechanics. I know even Journey has some sort of gameplay mechanics. We talked about that here before.
I would consider Journey to not be a walking simulator.
Yeah, right. It's more game than it is. Not story. That it's more game than it is story. Like, actually, like, I think Journey is like the perfect example of like a single player story focused game where the game pretty much like you couldn't really experience the story without the game. It feels like to me because
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
It's one of those games that exudes like, you know, we've talked about it before, but it's like this game that exudes being alone and dealing with the challenges that you and the obstacles and the things that you need to deal with alone. The gameplay isn't severely difficult, right?
No.
There is some platforming, there are some puzzle type situations, and it can be unforgiving as Kyle's story with the guy he was with who fell like 80 feet and was trying to get back to him. Like, it definitely has that, but there's something about it where it's almost like you you wouldn't be able to understand the story without experiencing the gameplay. So it's almost like the perfect example, in my opinion, of a single player story focused game.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, that's what I was saying, was that it actually has gameplay. But I think a lot of people do consider it to be like a slow, boring game.
Yeah, I could see that.
So I was just saying that it might be the impression that most people have, like, oh, it's just a walking simulator. But it's not.
Based on your expectations, I could definitely see how people would go in and kind of tune out, you know, because I think it can come off as pretentious, like we were talking about earlier. If I don't know the conditions, I guess, because I went into it blind, knowing that other people enjoyed it, so I was kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt at the beginning, and then eventually I came to enjoy it myself. But I could definitely see how, I guess, if you don't have any sort of like motive to continue the game, then a lot of the stuff you'll be doing, you'll just be asking why.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a step back for a second, because I think it was the podcast that me and you did, Steve, where we were talking about bosses. And before we started talking bosses, and then later in the conversation we were like, oh, like let's define what a boss is. And, you know, and it made sense. Like we were basically talking the same, like we had the same definition. But now that we're talking about like, you know, the idea of a walking simulator not being a game, I'd like to hear from y'all, like, what is a game? Like, what makes a game?
Oh no.
Yeah. Like think about it as not like, oh, a game, like the universal understanding, but for you, when you sit down in front of a computer or in front of a console and you pick it up, like what elements does a game mean to you, other than it being on the Xbox or the the PS4 or whatever? Like, so I mean, Kyle, you can start. Like,
good luck, Kyle.
I was gonna let Steve go first.
Yeah, I mean, I can go. I'm always ready.
Not this time, baby.
I'm always ready.
Okay, so I would say in a word, games for me are an escape.
It's too many words.
From done. You're done. Okay,
I'm
Steve,
done.
go ahead. No,
next.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Me escape from this conversation. So, to me, games are an escape from like reality. You know, like I feel like in order for something to be a game, and not to, I guess, answer it in the construct way, but I actually like hold the games accountable to like fulfill these checklist items. You know, there has to be like rules in a game that make like the game interesting. You know, like there's things that happened, that the rules that exist, going back to like talking about like FIFA and these simulator sports games, like those games, like you think about, if you break down the rules of football, you know, like carry this to the other end of this area and I'll give you points. Like, put that on.
Makes it sound so terrible.
Exactly. But without those rules, you know, then you're just running around looking like an idiot. But if you're doing that against someone, then, you know, now you've escaped reality with these weird rules that make whatever you're doing, you know, more enjoyable. And so I think on a surface level, a game needs to achieve that. Like I need to be doing something else fundamentally when I'm playing a game. And that's why I don't consider walking simulators to be games, because I feel like I could just go walk.
And like somebody will like walk up behind you and say, and as he approached the woods, a deep fog.
Like, man, if you don't back up.
He's like, nah, this is my normal life. I don't know what y'all do.
And it has Kyle's voice.
Oh gosh.
I was thinking about the fight I just had with my wife. Why was she so derogatory towards me?
Press circle to throw trash out. Circle.
Do I really smell as bad as she said I did?
Ooh. Wait a minute.
Okay. Is there anything else
game.
to add to that other than having it being something that you wouldn't do in your real life that has a set of rules?
No, I think to give you my shortest answer, that would be it. Of course, right. I think there's more that goes into it, but...
All right. Steve, give us your shortest answer.
It's not going to be shortest answer. In a word, I think
world.
Games...
I'm sorry, it sounded like the movie guy. You start off, in a world. Go ahead.
In a world where video games are on the cusp of being invented. So I think that what I think the definition has changed, right? It used to be about the challenge, right? About challenging yourself and, I don't know, exploring some fantasy, or maybe not escapism specifically, but people like sci-fi and fantasy and other things like that. But yeah, it's about a challenge, right? The game is something that has gameplay elements, and gameplay elements are things that you can lose at, right? Like you can either have a game over or be blocked from proceeding or something.
Yeah.
So there's, even if it's not much of a challenge, it's something that requires your interaction in a specific way to proceed to the end. Whereas a movie just requires you to look at it, right? It'll keep going no matter what. I think the definition is loosened a lot because we have these, so-called walking simulators where there's not really a way to lose. But even a walking simulator, you still have to walk to the right spot, I assume, to trigger it. I mean, the worst imaginable game I can think of would be like a walking simulator just on a sidewalk in space, and you just see and hear things as you walk past, and you can't even choose what direction you walk in. That would be awful.
Ooh. In VR.
Yeah. At that point, it's not even a walking simulator. It's a thumbstick push simulator.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say something that has gameplay. And of course, there's been things added to that. So games have stories. Games are an artistic expression. And they're a way for us to interact with each other. So I guess I'm just expounding on the three kinds of games I talked about earlier. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think for me, a game is simply something that has a win-lose condition that can fundamentally, its goal is to bring you enjoyment in some capacity. And yes, I think there's rules, which is the win-lose condition, and there's ways to engage with the game, maybe through different mediums, a card game, a video game, whatever, board game. But really, at the end of the day, I think a game is something that has a winning condition and lose condition. Some games, the winning condition is to never lose, right? It's just so the win condition is not losing. And also something that's whole focus and its goal is to bring enjoyment, right?
Let me ask you.
Yeah.
I just thought of something. You said bring enjoyment was the goal. And I immediately thought about, what about like educational games where the goal isn't to have fun. Having fun is a means to an end. It's a means to learning something. But then I realized that you could say that about any game, that you have to learn the mechanic to actually, like, even if the mechanic isn't mathematics or, hooked on phonics or something, like you still have to learn either a way to solve a puzzle or learn to be good at like your instincts and fight monsters in a fast-paced game.
Yeah.
Like it's still teaching you something. Whichever one is the means to an end versus, learning the thing or having fun. I guess that depends on the game, but I think that, what do you think? Is that a reasonable addition to what you were about to continue saying before I interrupted you?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the things that I believe that games are fundamentally vehicles of learning, learning the game, right? Learning what's important in the game. And actually, I'm going to do a little plug here, but like on November 8th, I'll be doing a talk at this place at a conference called DevRelCon 2021, right? And my talk is called How Game Development gave me a head start on becoming a developer advocate. That's my job. And one of the points that I'm going to make is talking about how essentially games are fundamentally just about teaching. Like, that's just what they are. Like, they are trying to teach you how to be better at the game. That's like essentially every game ever, right? Yeah. So I think as a part of, you kind of stole my thunder, I give it to you, is that like a game is essentially fundamentally a teaching tool, and all the fun that comes from a game is learning how to be better at the game. So I honestly think that learning games are a misnomer, and they're just games, and they're just, most of them are not games because they're just learning, but there's no fun, which I think isn't important, and there's no lose condition. Like, there's just win, like just win.
A lot of
what kind of learning games are you talking about? Where there's no lose condition.
I mean, I guess there's a lose condition in a quiz, but
that's not a learning. It's a knowledge test.
It's a knowledge test. It's not fundamentally made to be fun. Like, that's not its goal. Its goal is, like you said, to test your knowledge.
You get a grade.
I would draw a line between a game and a test. I don't think they're even conceptually similar.
But that's kind of the weird part about where learning games are. A lot of them just are tests that have like pretty colors, and
they're not just tests, because you learn things. Maybe you have a test at the end, and that's the win condition. But you learn something during the game.
But that's not how they present it. They present the game as the quiz. Like, you do your learning, and then your game, your reward, your fun is taking a quiz that you can fail. And they just put like what they call game elements, gamification. So check this out. I want to go down this rabbit hole. Let's table this conversation for a purely gamification. Like, I want to really go into this, because I think this is one of the biggest. Me and Kyle have so many issues with this, and I think Steve, you're hitting it. Like, you don't do this per se like as your day job, but you get it, and I want to talk about it.
And he's experienced it.
He's experienced it.
It's true.
The lie.
It's traumatic.
And as a gamer, it's disrespectful. Like,
it is.
It's disrespectful. So just to turn the conversation, I'm going to write this down to make sure that we don't forget this. But okay, we have our definition of games. Now, what makes a game like story focused? Because I think I even immediately messed up when I was like, oh, isn't Hades story focused? And then I was like, well, maybe it's not, because that goes against my thoughts about the game, blah, 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 blah. Like, what makes y'all say like, oh, a game is story focused versus like gameplay focused?
Yeah. So story focused, I mean, I guess it would depend on the intensity. Like, do you mean focused as in the game doesn't progress without the story? Like, it's that reliant on it, or the gameplay progresses the story, so it's reliant on it that way? Like, what do you, I guess which angle?
Well, that's my question to you. When you hear the word story focus, what does that mean to you?
Okay.
So I guess I would lean more towards that anything you do in the game like informs or progresses the story. Whether or not it's directly linked, the reason why you're doing what you're doing is to get to the next story beat. So by that token, I would say that Hades is pretty story driven, because unless you do a run, you don't get more story. While in other games, I believe there are times where you could not do what the game asks you to, quote unquote, and still get more story.
I feel like your example's backwards, right? Wouldn't that mean that it's gameplay focused if gameplay is what paces the story?
I guess that's where I'm having a disconnect too. I mean, I guess they're so intertwined, but I think we also agreed that the gameplay in Hades could be standalone. Like like the story itself isn't reliant on the gameplay. Well, but you have to do a run to get more story.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I feel like we're maybe conflating different things here. My opinion or my thoughts are that, between gameplay focus or story focus, I don't know if it makes sense. I could be convinced, so let's see what happens. But I don't know if it makes sense to say that all games are either, or they're more one or the other. I think the only real observation we can make objectively is game has story or a game has gameplay, which hopefully most games do.
Both are desired.
Right. And then I guess the question of, is it story focused or is it gameplay focused? It might just come down to like the person playing. Like if I'm into it for the story, I might think it's a story focused game. If I'm into it for the gameplay, I might say it's a gameplay focused game.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if it's like tic-tac-toe where there's no story, right? You're just playing the game. That's absolutely a gameplay focused game.
Yeah.
Or a walking simulator where there's no gameplay. It's only story.
It's story focused. Yeah. So it's not a game, it's just story focused.
That's a planetarium.
No, I think that, Steve, you brought up a good point. Perspective is important. Also, I'll be booting you from the chat. No, no, but like that's a good point. Like I think that naturally makes sense, but I've never thought about it before. But like how you perceive a game is what you'll probably determine it as. Like, so for me, for example, Hades, I say is story focused, but the reason that I stopped playing it was because of the story, the gameplay, right? Like in my head, like, I'm going to stop playing it because I don't want to really play the game anymore, but I'm interested in the story. But like fundamentally, it's all about the gameplay. Like you could play that game forever, just playing it, and the story would never progress. You know what I'm saying? Like you
can get to the end and keep playing.
Exactly. Now, a game like Dead Rising, one of my favorites, is a very story-focused game in its main mode because pretty much everything you do is driven by the story moving forward, right? Like you can't play the game if you don't accomplish the story missions, if that makes sense. Like you can go around and kill zombies and it'll let you, but like you fail the game if you don't,
the game will end.
Like get all the story beats. Like as a journalist, your goal is to get the story. And it is definitely gameplay heavy, really cool gameplay, but in the main mode, at least, it very much feels story focused. Like that's what drives you forward. That's what changes the environment, the difficulty, it's very much like, well, anyway, I'm not going to go on that tangent. But long story short is, I totally agree with you, Steve. Like, there's definitely a perspective on it. But I also do think, like, a game like Solitaire is not story-focused. But I do think a game like Tomb Raider, the new Tomb Raider, I don't remember what it's called. Like, I think it's just called Tomb Raider. Is
Rise
of
Tomb
Raider is a story-focused game. Even though, because the gameplay, or like Uncharted, I don't know if you could argue that it's not a story-focused game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and there's also... Sorry, I was going to say there's also a lot of games that are very cinematic recently. Uncharted, new God of War. And so it's hard to say they're not story-focused because it feels like... Oh, The Last of Us as well. It feels like they're really catering to the story. I had another thought, but I'm going to let Kyle continue before I continue.
So maybe you guys remember, but when it came to Uncharted, there was like this, I forgot what the phrase was they coined, but it was like some sort of dissonance, I guess, between the gameplay. Dissonance? I don't remember, but like it was the disconnect between the gameplay and the story. Where the story was you're Nathan Drake and he's just an archaeologist who happens to carry a gun, he gets in trouble. But then like the actual moment to moment gameplay is that you're mowing down, dozens of henchmen with automatic weapons. And they were talking about, and so when I think about, I guess, the story driven gameplay, games like Uncharted and even Hades to a degree kind of hit the same note to me as bad gamification, and I'm just gonna stay here for a second, but like
oh boy.
the gamification learning games that have, you do trivia for a second, and then once you're past trivia, it brings you to like Bejeweled, and so like your reward for getting past the learning is to play like a really fun game, and then if you fail the game, you're brought back to trivia, and it's like, here's more learning. And it's almost like, I know they don't do this intentionally, but it's like you're brought back to the less interesting stuff. And I think that both the story and the gameplay in Uncharted is interesting, but it's like there's such a disconnect. Like if you're really into shooters, but don't like cinematic games, then, there's a big, it's like a huge section of Uncharted that won't be appealing to you.
But I think that even makes it more, to me, like one of those things where, like Hades, going back to Hades, it's like the game, it is a game fundamentally, right? It has rules, wins conditions, all this stuff. but the game determines how much you can engage with the story, right? And the story is interesting and all that, but you have to play the game. Like you can't get around that. Right? Like there's no nuancing, because otherwise it would just be a walking simulator, right? Like you don't need the game. You just go on YouTube, right? And just watch the story. But the game fundamentally is, I don't want to say drives the story, but makes the story, like you can't progress without the game. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah. So I kind of got off on my but my point earlier was, I guess, that like to be a story-driven game, I feel like it makes the experience more cohesive if the gameplay is kind of like the same pacing or like the same feel as the story is giving. Like maybe not the same drama necessarily, but it feels like you're in the same experience.
You just want them to match up.
I think a perfect example of that is Gears of War, and I know Steve has played Gears of War. Have you played that, Kyle?
Yeah, I play a little bit of Gears.
Yeah, so Gears is a story-driven game. Story, narrative. There's a thing you're trying to figure out, a mystery, what's happening, why these monsters attacking us, and it's very brutal. But the story itself is about being in a war-torn, like everybody dying around you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there's no disconnect from the gameplay, because it's not like you said, Nathan Drake is now drinking a beer with, character X having a great time laughing. It's like, no, we're in a deep, gritty, horrible situation. And all the cutscenes are like, how do we get out this situation? What do we do? Oh no, they're attacking us. We got to fight again. Like it's, and yes, Uncharted has those moments where you're like doing something and then you get attacked, but it really, I can definitely feel you, like, and they clearly know it. It just completely separates you from the gameplay sometimes. And
Yeah. I get what you're talking about, Kyle. I don't think that the gamification, like the quality of the gamification, necessarily means that something is more or less story focused. I think that's just the quality of the gamification, right? I feel like that's a different axis entirely. And for some people, you won't be able to enjoy a story if the gameplay doesn't line up, and I totally agree with that and get it. I don't know if that answered the question, but I do think that's a thing that is worth considering. Earlier, I said that that it might be based on our perception. Like, if I like story, then I'll think a game is story focused. But then I was thinking more about it, and I'm like, actually, another way to go might be what the game developers and writers were thinking, right? Because, I feel like in most cases, the game studio or whoever makes the game probably had either a story in mind and came up with gameplay to match it, or had gameplay in mind and came up with a story to match it.
Yeah.
And so in the early days, it was very much the latter, where you
gameplay first.
Yeah, like you have a jump man, and he jumps on little mushroom men, and saves the princess, and then from that you have the admittedly still weak story about Super Mario.
Oh yes,
Like Nintendo is all about story first.
It's never recovered.
Gameplay first. Gameplay
Story
first.
for.
yeah. I was compelled. The Mario movie is gonna be.
Oh man.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
They have no foundation.
Yo, it'll probably be really good, man. I mean, the fact that like Sonic was decent, pretty decent. Wreck-It Ralph, like they're you know, like hey, they can pull it together, especially when it's a comedy kind of thing.
They have to break the formula.
You know,
we'll see.
I was gonna say it's interesting that you say that, Steve, because I agree, and then also know that sometimes it's interesting how intentions shift because like think about a game like Final Fantasy back in the day. Like it was like a game, right? Like all you do is grind. Like you play it and there's little bits of story, but if you think about a Final Fantasy game, the thing that people talk about a lot are the characters, right? Oh, the Clouds and the Sephiroths and the you know,
sure.
whatever game, right? But fundamentally, like you said, back in the day, it was like, okay, first we need to make a game that can run on this system that, you know, we can't like use too much memory, can't, you know, and then they kind of build the story on it. And sometimes the two come together in a beautiful accident. And then there's times like what I believe, like Bug Snacks, which me and Kyle have had a deep conversation with and a special podcast about, is like, it's a very story, like narrative was clearly the most important thing to them, but the gameplay is like servicing that. And then there's stuff like Horizon Zero Dawn. And the reason I bring up Horizon Zero Dawn, and Kyle, you may remember this, when we went to GDC in 2018 or whatever. Remember that Horizon Zero Dawn came from basically an internal game jam, more or less. And it was just a mechanic that they were messing around with, like somebody shooting a dinosaur. It was very
giant mech Lego.
Yeah, like a mecho
dinosaur.
A Lego mech looking dinosaur. And and it was just like literally they just started with the gameplay. They went to the Nintendo method and they kind of made this gameplay, and then they were like, let's build a really cool rich story around it. And the studio, which was known for what's those shooters? I'm now blanking on. They always just launch
any shooter
with the PlayStation.
Not Call of Duties.
No. I'll remember it at some point. But they're a shooter game like company.
Different shooter game.
I can't remember the name of the games that
Battlefield.
But anyway, the interesting thing is like how they now, like when I think about Horizon Zero Dawn, I don't think that gameplay first. I think story first. I mean, the gameplay is great, right? It's awesome. But I think when I think of the commercials, when I think of the trailers, the media, it's all about the story. So it's interesting how a game can like turn that corner from a developer's point of view.
I don't feel like if I had looked at Horizon Zero Dawn and I don't think I would have thought this was a game that was built around the story rather than the other way around. I'm not that surprised to hear the story you just told.
Why do you say that?
But I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure. I can't. I'm trying not to think of a game to disprove myself. Like, what's a game that I would look at and think, oh, they definitely made the game around the story?
Ooh. Probably a very bad game.
Probably.
You know,
I remember.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
We had a coworker. I think you guys might remember this conversation. We were talking about making games at IBM, and we had a coworker who approached us and was describing a situation or a world he had built, and he kept talking about all this, like all these themes and all these story elements he wanted to tell. And I think you guys were also doing this, but I remember specifically that I was like, but what is the gameplay going to be like? Like, what is the structure of the game? Is it going to be an open world game? Is it going to be, more linear? Is it going to be like a open, like first person shooter, or is it on rails? Like, what are you doing? Is it an RPG? And he didn't know. And I'm like, well, then write a book, Like, if it doesn't need to be a game, then don't make it a game.
Put the computer down and pick up a pen.
Well,
And I feel like that's in general. I subscribe very much to the Nintendo philosophy of have gameplay and maybe more than Nintendo, like write a story. do what Guerrilla did and make Horizon Zero Dawn from the gameplay.
well, okay, Kyle. Oh yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you a question. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say I played the first little bit of Horizon Zero Dawn, and I had a similar, I guess, thought that. But to me, the game actually felt like after the conference, I was kind of torn because playing the game, it felt like actually they had this idea for a cool world first. And so they built like the story and all these mechanics in the world. And then like whenever they actually put the game together, it just felt kind of clunky. It was
Really?
it felt like it was just a bunch of ideas. And so I didn't enjoy the time I played because I just never felt grounded, I guess, playing that game.
Well,
So your perception was that it was story first because because it was clunky, and therefore you didn't like. Well, not because of your perception, but because it was clunky, you didn't enjoy yourself with the game.
Yeah, but I know a lot of people who did, Brad included, that it really enjoyed the game, both gameplay and story. So,
it's interesting that you say that because so I'm a big story person in general, right? Like I'll watch a movie and, Steve used to live with me and he knows that I'll start watching a TV show, a movie in the middle of it if I think it's garbage. And
I can't understand.
and 90% of the reason is because I can already figure out where it's going. I'm like, oh, I already know how this ends. Like there's no point in me watching this, So, it's interesting because I walked into Horizon Zero Dawn with the story being in the world, like you were saying, Kyle, as being like clearly what they started with. I perceive now, after going to GDC, of course, and now I know behind the story, it makes sense. Like the mechanics and stuff is what they were like the thing that was the bread and butter. And actually, I can kind of tell that the story wasn't the main because I can see almost. I think me and you were talking about this, Steve, like that elementary, like somebody writing a story as a kid and they're like, oh, I'm going to include all the cool stuff that I know is cool in it. I can catch those moments from time to time where I was like, yo, this is not, this is
corny.
Yeah, this is corny. Exactly. This is really corny. And I feel like that like, it doesn't kill the game for me. Like I like the game still, but I could catch that pretty early on that like, oh, this is not their strength, telling a story, but they're doing a good job nonetheless. And oh, by the way, these are the guys that made Killzone, the shooter.
Killzone.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking of, Killzone?
They made Killzone, which was like almost like the game that launched with every single PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4. It was like I think even PlayStation 2. Like Killzone was like the system seller at one point. But anywho,
would you say that Killzone was the Dark Souls of system selling games?
Wow.
that's saying a lot.
I'm sorry, we were talking about bad Dark Souls comparisons earlier today.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask you a question, Steve, because you made a point about somebody sharing a game. Kyle, you already know where I'm going with this question.
I'll wait.
Kyle, when somebody approaches you about making a game, how do they normally pitch it to you? Like, describe to me the interaction when somebody knows that you're a game developer and that you make games, and they want you to help them make a game. How do they pitch it to you?
So I'll try to say this verbatim if I can.
Right.
So 9 out of 10 times I haven't met them before.
100%.
Or like one time in passing. But they walk up and they say, "Hey, I heard you make games."
Yep.
We want a game. And then they pause. And I have to ask, what about? And which is usually the wrong question.
Right.
Because for some reason, about means, well, we have a platform that we want users to engage with, and they're learning about this, and we just want it to be really fun, and we want to have a leaderboard. And it's like, whoa.
This is at IBM you guys are talking about.
Hey, don't be name dropping. Anyway, so after about 30 minutes of going back and forth of getting no information, I'm about to start crying just thinking about it. So, yeah, from there, eventually, I get to the point where I'm like, well, what's the subject matter? Where is this going? Who's playing it? All these questions that you think would come up if I say, what's it about? What's it for? Stuff like that. Like, it's like pulling teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like, the thought is, well, so-and-so has this game, and so we wanted something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually like an actual game,
yeah,
like not another learning game. But they're like, yeah, have you played Halo? We want that, but we want to teach people. We want to teach them how to sell cars. It's like, man, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
Yeah. And the reason I ask you that question is because I think essentially what happens for people who are not like, not even people who are gamers, because I think gamers do the same thing. People who are not aware of how game development works and how games are made, is that they don't start...
Or what games are.
Yeah, what games are fundamentally. They don't start at where games start, which is the game. Like the gameplay, like the Nintendo method. We have a square in a white room, and it does a particular thing. And all of a sudden, we made Super Mario Odyssey. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they start from the base. Most people think of games as how they experienced a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So... what I've learned is, one, what Kyle just talked about, somebody trying to take a game to express something in a way that doesn't make sense, like a corporate thing or selling something or, a product or something like, okay, that doesn't make sense. Or the opposite, which is somebody who has played games their whole lives or played games as a kid. And when they think of games, they think about the experience that they felt, right? The story, the characters, how many hours they spent in the basement. Yeah. They think about the feeling, but not what made that feeling possible.
Not
no substance.
Yes, exactly. So when they think back to when they were playing Nintendo, Nintendo games were fundamentally just games, right? Almost no stories. But they think about that one little screen where it showed the little title and and then the ninja went to kill the man. Like, that's the whole story. But for some reason, because kids are imaginative, you create a background, you create these things. And now as you get older, you think of it like, yeah, I remember that game. It made me feel like I was really a ninja. Dog, you were jumping sideways and stabbing. Like, you ain't doing nothing. But that's
8 pixels tall.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people can't connect the idea that the game has to come first before the story. And yes, a game can become story focused or even derive from a story, but the gameplay is so essential in order to make it feel, right,
Yeah, I think about Limbo sometimes. Have you guys played Limbo? I think you have.
That's a game that's on my bucket list. I still have not played it, sadly.
I've played the first hour or so. I know it's not a very long game, but I haven't played the whole thing. I know that for sure.
I mean, when you say the first hour, you mean like you played an hour where you died a lot, or you played an hour straight without dying?
No, I definitely died a few times.
Okay.
Yeah, but...
I mean, out of like a probably 3-hour game total, that's either a lot or not a lot. It depends on how often you died.
That's a fair point.
Anyway, so the thing about Limbo is there's no dialogue. There's barely any even grunting from the boy who you play as. Like if you get stabbed, he kind of goes and that's it. All and it's not even said in the game. I think that on the Steam page, it's a boy goes to Limbo to look for a girl or something. You don't even know who the girl is. Is it his sister? Is it his girlfriend? He's kind of young, so maybe not his girlfriend. That's it. That's the whole story. But it still feels compelling because of the atmosphere of the game. You're like, oh, you don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, it's exciting. And you're like, minor spoilers, I guess, but at some point in the game, you're not just solving environmental puzzles or running from monsters. You're also running from people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with Inside, where you're kind of like, you're not really told what's going on. You have to piece it together as you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, they give very, very minor... I mean, they really could have just given you the game with no explanation and it would have been fine. But they were just kind of... It almost feels like an afterthought. But I wonder if it was an afterthought or if that was what they started with and then they were like, let's make a game about that, the story.
Yeah, that's interesting because, like, in many ways, I wonder the same with Journey. Journey is very much like that. Like, it very much feels like a parallel where, like, there's not any dialogue, right? Like, it's just music and, like, hieroglyphics. And
did the hieroglyphics translate into anything?
No, it's just
nothing that you can read.
Yeah, it's just imagery, motion, motion imagery, and then like what happens in the game itself with the gameplay. And so I think like it's interesting that, you know, we're talking about games being very good story focused games, and they're like the games that aren't even like they're not telling you the story. You're like experiencing the story.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really cool. I guess to clarify, the story is still there. That's why I would say it's a story-focused game. Whereas with Limbo, there's not really a story.
Oh, okay. So it's not really.
I mean, there's a
story.
It's like a narrative.
There's a vague narrative, but like it really just boils down to the boys looking for a girl. Like there's not.
Yeah.
Inside has more of a story. Inside is like what you're saying, Brad, where there's tons of there's a lot of stuff happening. It just doesn't tell you outright. You have to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think Hyperlight Drifter does the same thing, where there's a lot of things happening, but you don't really see a lot of the motivations or background stuff.
So I think Limbo kind of plays into what Brad was talking about. Then, like, I think it kind of hits the same thing as older games. You might have been brought it up in this light, but you know, because it's so objective based, and like there are things that you do that might only happen to you or happen to you a certain way. And then, you know, I remember back in the day, you'd play games before the internet and you'd have like, you talk about it on the playground, like what happened in these games. And because they didn't have such deep stories, you were able to even expand upon it even more. And I think that might be one of the drawbacks really to like super story heavy games is like, well, have you gotten to the part where this happens yet? Rather than, I was here and then this happened to me and all of a sudden, you know, another monster came out of, you know, nowhere and I had no idea what I could do, so I ran away. And you have like a story that you created in the moment.
Yeah.
You know?
Like it's experiential, right? Like you experienced the story versus you read or watched the story, right? Like, and that's what I think is really cool. And I think, you know, RPGs like the Final Fantasy games, they did a good job in that too, where like, yeah, the gameplay was kind of like that dissonance, like you're saying, where it's like you're literally standing in a place like taking turns fighting each other, but they're very contextualized battles with contextualized characters and contextualized moments. So you felt like you were actually playing the story instead of watching the story. Like, there's moments in Final Fantasy VII that I think of, and that to this day I feel almost like I was there when it happened. but when I go back and I look at that moment, I was like, yo, like this game has not aged. You know, like it's literally just pixelated looking, but it felt so immersive at the time. Like there's a moment where you're trying to escape from basically like a facility and you're fighting these people and then events will happen because of what you did, and it just feels like you're driving the story and the story is like fighting back against you, you know?
That's a good feeling.
And that's what I think it's really rare. I mean, that's why I think like game development is an art form. Like, yeah, anybody can make a cool game mechanic, but can you make it feel like something, you know?
Yeah.
You know what I just realized? I think JRPGs, like especially the old turn-based ones, I think that's a great example of story-first development. I assume it's story-first because it feels like, I mean, all right, you know, high level, a lot of JRPGs have basically the same mechanics, right? You have, it's turn-based, You run around an overworld, you fight monsters, especially the old ones. You fight random monsters, you level up.
Find items.
You learn new abilities. Yeah, you find items like potions and stuff. And they not that they're not innovative and iterative, like the gameplay definitely has changed over time, but that's pretty much all there is to it.
Yeah, they're super formulaic.
It's very
by
formulaic.
nature.
The big draw, and I assume a lot of the thought that went into these games is the writing and the story. And it's always these super epic stories, right? Like all the I don't know about Final Fantasy, but like I've played Skies of Arcadia, I've played Chrono Trigger, and it's
Dragon Quest.
Huh?
Have you played any of the Dragon Quests?
I've never played Dragon Quest, but I played the demo that came out on Switch recently. But I can tell already that it's a hugely epic story. I know massive. Final Fantasy VII, I played a little. I know that's pretty epic just from what I know.
Ni no Kuni.
I forgot about Ni no Kuni, yeah. I would say Ni no Kuni might be a little more gameplay focused, but it definitely feels world first and story first.
Yeah, they went heavier in on the gameplay.
Well,
and that might be why JRPGs are so like distinctive, because they all look similar gameplay wise, but they're so rich and people still love them, you know?
Well, think about it this way. So I will slightly, in my personal opinion, disagree with that, just because like fundamentally some of the most difficult games to make from a just purely systemic standpoint, gameplay development standpoint, are RPGs, because they're so I don't know how to say it, like system intensive.
They're so complex.
Yeah, like there's everything matters. You have to balancing is so important.
Of course,
like, everything has stats.
Wait, like even more than like a Super Mario Galaxy, right? Or Odyssey. Like the beginning and the end are so intertwined that like it's a very like it's like RPG development is like, if you're not fully an RPG developer, you will be broken. Your spirit will die. Like real talk, right? Because it's like a very game focused game. Now, the one thing that is interesting and why I think stories really lend to RPGs, because RPGs, role playing games, come from the whole concept of, you know, a role playing game. Like you play a role and you have certain statistics, and, you know, going back to tabletop like RPGs, right? And the reason those games really made sense is because as an orc, level 5 orc with this type of ability, when you're in certain circumstances, your abilities really matter. So the story and the role that you're playing really matter. So Japanese RPGs, which, you know, essentially were the first, they had no story. Like Final Fantasy, the original ones, like had like no story, right? It was just like you played a class, like it had a story. Like, let me not get it wrong, but it was like really heavy gameplay, you know, and like menus and choosing your stats and like.
So it was about the experience of playing an RPG tabletop as a game.
Exactly. Yeah. So as it evolved, it naturally grew, right? Like now you're playing a swordsman who has lost his memory with magic powers, and you're trying to do a thing, and it just kind of naturally. So not that you're wrong, I just think it's interesting how that makes sense, right? Like because of the gameplay is super heavy, but like the story makes so much sense because you're playing the role. You are like literally you are that character in the game, which is super cool.
But I think that I meant two things. Well, I'll say two things. First, I didn't mean to say that they don't pay attention to the gameplay. Obviously, RPGs are super, super complex. What I meant was that I felt like it was gameplay. I mean, if you take how do I put this? If you took the story out of an RPG, right? If you take Final Fantasy VII, you remove the story, or you remove the gameplay and you put that same gameplay in a different story, it could be just as good, right? Like even if the stakes weren't as high, or the characters were totally different, you would balance things differently, maybe, right? But my point is, it's kind of more generic, like a suit on top of the story rather than.
I would say you could say that with like a shooter, but I don't think you could do that with an RPG, because the RPG, a lot of times, the mechanics and the things that are in it are 100% based on what the world is, right? Like in Final Fantasy VII, it's materia and, magic and,
That's
all
true.
that stuff, right? In Ni no Kuni, it's, your MP and,
Your familiars.
like, what I'm saying? Like, it's always like really heavily based in the world. And if you were to remove that game and try to put it somewhere else, it wouldn't fit. But like, a shooter, you could drop in Apex gameplay into,
literally
any game,
yeah.
right? And it would still feel right. So,
I mean,
it's interesting.
Yeah, I think shooters are, not that I disagree with you. Well, sort of. I think what I said was vaguely true, but I think that your point that shooters are more like that is also true. Like, I don't respect shooters as a general rule, because to me it doesn't feel like the story or the gameplay are usually very good.
Okay. Speaking of shooters, I want to throw something at you, and I want to hear what you guys think about this. I think one of the best single-player, story-focused games of all time is Halo.
Yes, I knew it.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Of course, this is subjective, but what do you guys think about Halo as a story-focused game, single-player game?
So to me, I feel like that they handled the Halo campaigns with the same amount of like tender love and care that they did with like the Assassin's Creed games. Like your character is going through each of these story beats with a specific arsenal for a specific reason. Now, once you get into it, it's kind of sandboxy. Like, you have these weapons and things that you can use, but it's like all your training and stuff has led, and the Hitman games too are like this, where, it's kind of like that line, I guess, between an RPG and a fully story-based game, because it's a linear progression when you're in levels, but how, like, there isn't one solution though, necessarily. Like, sure, in Halo you're going to shoot everything, but you can pick up whatever guns, you can use grenades, you can melee everything if you want,
Yeah, God bless.
So,
I mean, you can't. You would die, but you can
yeah,
try.
you probably shouldn't, but but the thing is, it's not like, I guess, other games, shooters especially, where if you don't shoot them with this gun, you're likely just gonna die because it's not gonna do enough damage or some other kind of crazy condition.
You're saying shooters where the gun you use is kind of part of the puzzle you have to solve.
Yeah.
But in Halo, there's no puzzle. It's just use the gun that fits the situation.
And and I think it's contextual, right? If you load into different levels in Halo, like say you're on Earth and you're fighting the Covenant, like you're gonna have human weapons, sniper rifles, pistols, stuff like that, right? Then you drop on a Covenant ship and you're fighting with Covenant weapons, and you're in a Covenant situation. So like your gameplay is very different, and in those moments, and it feels
somewhat different.
Yeah, somewhat different, and it feels like you're in that moment, right? It doesn't feel like Call of Duty, where literally if you just flip to any chapter, you just got a gun, and it's just bigger set pieces or smaller set pieces.
Yeah,
like
it all feels samey.
It's funny because when I was dropping that bomb on shooters a few minutes ago, I in my head was thinking, I hope nobody asks me about Halo right after, 'cause I actually love Halo, and I feel like that's going to destroy what I was saying. Halo is one of the exceptions, or it has been. Sometimes it can feel. I guess people have been disappointed with Halo games, but I think the fact that people will complain like, "Oh, I don't like Halo 5 because of the story," like that means a lot, right? Because people were invested because of the story. The entire advertisement campaign for Halo 3 was based on a fake war, right? And have you seen those ads? They're insane. They have like memorials or they have like interviews with veterans from the war, like, oh yeah, and that's when Chief swooped in and he gave us hope. And it's so poignant.
Wow.
And it's so like it like gives you chills, and it makes people cry. And then you're like, this is for a video game. Like, it's not a real veteran, that's an actor. Or maybe it's a real veteran, but the war is not real. And they hit you with that piano, that ding,
Mm-hmm.
and it says, finish the fight or hope or something. And Master Chief holds up a grenade and it lights up, and you're like, yes, he's gonna get him. And like, that's story. That's not gameplay.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
And it's funny, even before you started talking about the shooters thing, I was thinking of Halo the whole time. It's like the perfect single player.
Brad's always thinking of Halo.
I'm always thinking of Halo. Because, I think it was Kyle, or I can't remember who just said it, but you were talking about how like you might be talking about a game and like it's a story game, or you're talking about a game and you talk about how like from the moments that happened within the game, like, oh man, I was in this room and then like they were throwing grenades at me and da 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 da, like, and you of course you talk about the story and how cool and interesting it is. And I think Halo is like perfect. Like we can all probably, if we've played Halo in some degree, think of like a scenario that was super ridiculous that we had to fight through, and we could all be playing that same situation and it would be experienced completely different. But we all have a story from it, right? Like, it's really super cool,
Yeah. And not just personal stories, but like, your story of like when you learned a twist. Like, oh my gosh, do you remember when the Gravemind caught Master Chief and Arbiter and convinced them to work together, and like they all three were working together to stop the rings from firing? Like, that was so cool, Or like everyone thinks that Cortana is like a total babe or something because she's like a compelling character, and Chief is a guy whose face we've never seen and is a compelling character.
Yeah.
So it's the mystery. Yeah.
I think Halo has a lot of good characters and has an interesting lore. Yeah. It definitely feels like a game. It was a game. I've seen the documentaries that was gameplay first. However, they just happened to like find that secret sauce and have a great story as well.
Day one, they killed it in both avenues and had a great multiplayer.
Yes. And
like it was a triple threat.
Yes.
Yeah. They have that perfect tone for multiplayer.
Yeah, and I think that's like a testament to like when like probably gameplay first, right? Like I would assume that Halo was built with the shooter first. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Actually, wait. I think I misspoke. From the documentary, I know that it was meant to be a different kind of game. It had different mechanics in mind.
Interesting.
And then based on the world they had, they were like, well, no. Yeah, it was, because what they ended up doing was they were like driving a warthog around. Mm-hmm. And they were like, wait, it's really fun. The closer we zoom in the camera behind the warthog, the more fun it gets. And they just made it first person, or not first person, but like a tight camera in the warthog. And they're like, let's do this. So like, it was going to be like a totally different kind of game set on somewhere called Halo. Who knows what that is? And yeah, it basically evolved through iteration and them saying like, what's more fun? How do we? There was going to be like a day-night cycle. There were going to be animals to like attack or tame. Like it was going to be super different. They were also constrained. They were supposed to be on the Mac, like an old Mac, and so. And they had to like, they had certain constraints, and then Microsoft swooped in and grabbed them.
That's crazy.
The real heroes.
Microsoft. Yeah, I think that's interesting because it tells the story of like, but it makes the point of like, fundamentally a game whose story comes out strong is a game that's, the story was kind of embedded in the gameplay from the beginning, right? Like, it was like, oh, we're going this direction in the world we have. These they don't connect. So let's bring them closer together. Let's make them tighter. Let's make them tighter. And eventually refining, first you need an interesting game that's fun to play. Let's make the story reflect that. Like, what makes sense to have a super soldier fighting in space? I mean, they could have made the story about fighting ancient worms in the middle of, they could have made it about anything, but they really found that, like, this lends really well and we can drive the story just like a RPG, right? Like they find that certain stories kind of lend really well with RPGs versus other stories that like, imagine a story about like, I don't know, like, no, pretty much an RPG can be about anything because fundamentally it's role playing. But anyway, I feel like what you're describing is exactly the perfect formula for game development and story based games.
I heard the other day somebody made an RPG where you play as Charles Barkley.
That's probably fire. It's probably fire.
No kidding.
I don't know what I'm gonna do.
I forgot what you have to do, but I think you have to save the world in some capacity using the power of friendship in basketball. But I'm not entirely
That's
sure.
so silly.
And then there's Shaq Fu.
Yeah.
You know, like what is Shaq Fu? Like you're beat 'em up with Shaq, and the story, like the new Shaq Fu. Like remember when that was coming out, Kyle, and we were watching all the like. It's like what in the you know,
millions on marketing,
millions
to make hundreds off of
$32. Well, wasn't it a Kickstarter? It was a Kickstarter, right?
Oh, it was Kickstarted, yeah. But it was it looked completely different whenever the Kickstarter was funded.
Mm-hmm. And
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have heard of YIIK, right?
YIIK,
Oh
yeah,
goodness.
Y2K.
No, we'll call it YIIK.
YIIK.
What do you think came first? The
Oh.
awful
Story.
gameplay or the awful story?
It's not even up for debate. The story 100%.
And it comes back to that thing when you think that you have you're good at making stories, but you're not.
You think you're good at writing dialogue.
Yeah.
And you think that you and your friends are good at voice acting.
I've heard some people say that, you know, like the most of the moment-to-moment gameplay was all right, minus a few obnoxious details. But yeah, I wonder how the story or how the game would have fared if the story wasn't so a bit. That's a pretentious game.
It was like tone deaf. It's like they didn't realize, I guess, what they were making. Because I think a lot of gameplay development first developers or developers who make a game that they know will fit well within an RPG are open to compromise to make their game better.
Mm-hmm.
And YIIK plays like one of those games that was not willing to compromise their story.
Yes.
You're right, because it felt like there's some elements, and not just the story, I think, but the theme as well. Seems like there's some elements of the game, like the weird mini games you have to play for all your attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That they were just too attached to, and they never asked, "Is this fun?
Right?
Like, is this enjoyable?"
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations where the people who made the game think they know better than everybody else, right? Like a really good game developer, a really good creative movie director, writer, they are not writing for themselves per se. Like, hey, like I have a really cool story, but they're like, I got to think about my audience, right?
Yeah.
Like, it really felt like this game, YIIK, was made for themselves only. Like they weren't thinking about any, like, oh, it'd be really cool if we have like a 10-minute cutscene with a panda looking thing, like in another world, talking about
llama,
like esoteric Evangelion-esque stuff, but we're not smart enough to know how to handle that. You know, it's just terrible, you know? And
yeah, I think that's one of the caveats to being a creative too, is that there is also the side of making things that you would enjoy for people who are like you. And also while you're making it, you know, if you enjoy it, you'll enjoy making it theoretically. And so it's like finding that line, I guess, between making something that appeals to other people, but that you yourself would also enjoy engaging with.
I think one of the best things that I've ever heard a game developer say early in my game developer journey is, he said, if you're not willing to throw away an idea, no matter how attached you are to it, no matter how cool it seems, no how many hours you've spent on it, you are not meant for this. And I didn't get it at the time because I was like, oh, that's like just some dude. But I mean, he was a successful dude, one of the luminaires in the industry at the time. But like, I didn't get it until I started to make games and see how important it was to give up on ideas. Like, talk about it all the time, but like when me and Kyle were making Amber in our little box, we had an idea of what Amber would be. It wasn't until people started touching it, Steve, and like being like, this makes no sense. This doesn't feel right. You know, that we were like, okay, let's throw that away. Yes, it's a compromise on our original vision, but that doesn't mean that we're, you know, like destroying our vision. We're just enhancing it so that other people can experience it, you know.
Sure.
And I think even in that moment, like I remember there being a little bit, at least on my part, resistance because, you know, we're so quote unquote intentional about the decisions that we made that we wanted people to just get it, you know, like this is how we made the game. We want you to experience it like this. If you just give it a chance, you'll like it type of stuff. But, you know, it's really like a naive way of thinking. Like to a degree, some of that stuff does make sense. You know, maybe mechanics and stuff are nuanced to where people do need to give it time to understand it. But if it's like for the sake, like either they learn it or they're going to put your game down, you know, it's like you have a decision to make at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes back to that definition of games. Like fundamentally, you're trying to teach people something. And if the material isn't interesting, engaging, or approachable, you know, like, then they won't be willing to learn it. If I try to teach to a first grader quantum, you know, I try to teach to a first grader quantum mechanics, they're just going to be like, all right, I'm going to go play with my toys. You know, like, they're going to walk away. And sure, maybe you teach them quantum mechanics down the road, right? But you need to, like, lack of a better word, onboard them into your game so that they can experience the game, experience the story. And, like, yeah, if you don't do that, you don't, as the guy said, you don't need to be in game development, you know?
Yeah.
What would you guys say is the most egregious, other than YIIK, the most egregious situation where a game clearly, or at least it feels like it was half baked, it was story first, and the gameplay is just not good?
Life of Black Tiger.
What is that?
Yeah. What is
really? the PS3 launch game?
I've never heard.
I've
literally never heard of that. Ever.
Yes, you have.
Life of Black Tiger. I don't. You know, I'm deeply invested in the gaming industry, and I've never heard of that in my life.
You think just because he's black, you would have heard of a game called Life of Black Tiger?
I know. I'm disappointed in you. But no, so yeah, Life of Black Tiger was a PS3 launch game that was panned because it was like worse quality-wise than a mobile game. But it had a trailer on the official PlayStation YouTube channel. It was like promoted on all of the PlayStation stores. And it was horrible. Like, there was no redeeming quality of the game.
Wow.
After this podcast, you guys, everybody listening, everybody under the sound of my voice, look up Life of Black Tiger.
Are you sure it was PS3? Because I've seen PS4 when I type Life of Black Tiger.
Even better if it was PS4.
Even more disrespectful.
It was.
Because
once you see it, you know, you'll understand. Even if it was PS3, there's still no reason for what happened.
I'd say
it's.
I
can't. Is it? And so the story was terrible. Is that what you're saying?
No. It doesn't have to be. Wait, are you talking to me or Kyle?
I guess both of you now. We're here.
Right. Are you clarifying what he said, or are you clarifying my question?
Yes.
Okay, my question was not even that the story is necessarily bad, but the fact that the gameplay is so unhinged from the story, or is so like underdeveloped compared to the story. Like, they clearly went into it with like, we have a story we want to tell, and whether they did a good job or not of telling the story, the game wasn't good.
So I think the story of Life of Black Tiger was that you're trying to survive this wilderness and find like your family or whatever. Like, I think it has a story, which is also like bare bones, but the gameplay is just so bad. Like, I don't know why it was the first thing to come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, it struck a chord.
Yeah.
It did, because I didn't write it down or anything like that. That was a visceral response from me just now.
I've never heard of it, and you had a visceral response.
Wow. Well, to my answer to that question, has to be actually a game, Dead Island. I don't know if you guys remember Dead Island, but
yeah, I do.
The reason I call out Dead Island is because it felt almost like Dirty Pool, because if you've seen the Dead Island trailer, it's one of the coolest trailers. I think one of the top 5 trailers all time.
Absolutely.
I remember showing to at my girlfriend at the time when it came out. I show her the trailer, and she wasn't even interested in games per se. And she was like, I'm interested in this game. I want to play this game. Yeah. The story seems super cool. I want to know what's happening. Dead Island comes out, and the story is so de-emphasized. It's so de-emphasized. It's
buried.
It's almost like it might as well. That trailer could have been for. You could have, if you played that game and then saw that trailer, you'd be like, that's not even the right game. That must be for another day.
It was clickbait. It was clickbait through and through.
Yeah. It was truly clickbait. And sadly, I think it was a marketing tool to the max. I mean, whoever made that deserves an Emmy, Oscar, whatever, because it was incredible. Oh, yeah. But to me, I felt really hurt by it because I walked into it expecting a really interesting story about the collapse of humanity from a zombie apocalypse kind of situation, kind of almost like Walking Dead or something, like in this game. But it was just purely just a zombie game, survival, with random characters, and there was like a really throwaway story like in any game. But yeah, so when I think of games that like did me wrong with the story gameplay, I immediately think of Dead Island.
Man.
Did you have?
Yeah, they had a bunch of really good trailers.
Really good. They really had a quality marketing team, and
the animation was like, for the time, it was crazy. Really top notch.
Super cool. And if you haven't seen the original Dead Island trailer, look it up. It is super cool. Even today, you'll be like, "Wow, that looks really interesting."
Wow.
Did you have one, Steve?
I can't think of one. I asked the question. I have nothing in mind. I feel like I don't play most games that come out. I only play games that I've heard are good, and that I'm already interested in for whatever reason. So like, for that reason, I feel like I've never been bitten like that. If I think of something, I'll let you know.
For that reason,
I think YIIK was the only one that came to mind, actually.
What were you?
You know what game that kind of suggested it had a deep story, but then kind of didn't, was the last 2 Smash Brothers games. Smash Brothers Brawl and Ultimate both kind of hinted to like these really deep
in 4
stories.
And 4 even had a little bit of that too.
I don't remember 4.
That was the Wii U one.
Yeah, but I don't remember the story. I had it on the 3DS and I played it maybe twice.
Well, I'm not asking about games that had disappointing stories. I'm like, Smash is the example of what I'm not talking about, right? Smash is a fighting game where they just kind of put a story on afterwards so that there's a classic mode, right?
So I thought your question was about like the game, I guess, or the developer first suggested there is a story.
Story first.
But
I don't think any Smash game has ever been story first.
Well,
I guess I'll retract my statement.
Well, no. I want to say this because I was there. I was there. I was there when Smash.
You saw the beginning.
When Smash Melee, I was a hardcore Smash Melee, and when Brawl was coming out, and they released a website where they would release a character every week and give you the background, and they had, and they were giving you this idea of deep space emissary, and all this stuff was happening. They made it really seem like this Smash Brothers was going to be like a different type of Smash Brothers, that the story was going to drive it in a way that had never been done. And even in Ultimate with the whole World of Light thing, they really made it seem like there was going to be a really cool story. And that drew me back into Smash Brothers, like, to be dead honest. And I do feel like the worst part of the game was the part that I was the most excited for, which was the story. Yes, like, it's kind of like some games, the gameplay is already solid, so they don't really have to do anything. But when they're like, hey, we're going to take it to the next level and make a story that's going to take this, like, for example, NBA 2K whatever has a story mode that's actually like with, what's his name? You know what I'm talking about, Kyle. With, it's like
the new one with Jake from Steak Farm.
No. Like it had a story mode. It had, that was written by Spike Lee, and like,
like Super.
Yeah, like they went hard with it and they did a good job. Like, even though it's just a basketball game, they made a story that was like literally did stuff. Like, there was plot twists in it, and like it was cool. And Smash Bros. I don't know. I agree with you, Kyle. Like, I feel like they did you wrong.
I think that's just bad marketing, right? But I mean, you could never argue that Smash Bros. Gameplay was defined by the story they wanted to write for World of Light or for Subspace Emissary.
Well,
like, it's definitely was a gameplay first game.
Yeah, I mean, and I think with NBA 2K, like, it's a gameplay first game, but the way that the way that they made this particular rendition of the game seem was that it was going to be a lot more story driven and a lot more about your, you know what I'm saying? Like, yes, you're going to, it's like Halo. Halo has a story and a multiplayer, and it doesn't take away from that the multiplayer is super strong when the story is, you know, like, it's not false marketing when they say the story's going to be great and it's great. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's
sure.
So what, I mean, they can say that they were like, oh, like, it's, you guys know, we're just Smash, or like, we're not whatever, but they made it seem like it was going to be a story game first. Like,
I mean, I agree that the market, especially, I don't remember much about Brawl's marketing, but I mean, Subspace Emissary actually was pretty hype. I don't know how you feel about it, but I agree. World of Light and the marketing leading up to Ultimate coming out are vastly different and super disappointing. So I'm with you there.
I think there were like 3 cutscenes in World of Light, and 2 of them they showed like in the trailer.
Yeah.
They're like, we gave you everything. We didn't lie. We showed you.
Yeah, like, I don't even need cutscenes. I just need a story.
You know what I needed World of Light to do? To stop. That's what I needed to do. Just stop.
Forever.
Like, to just be like, no, you're done. You made it. Like,
the most disrespectful thing was that they gave you a reason to play it. You know, they were like, we're not going to let you change the menu music unless you've beaten World of Light.
100% my reason.
That was dirty.
100% my reason to play the game. Like, and I couldn't do it. I still couldn't do it. I had
that's my number one request for the game, and I am not willing to beat World of Light to get it. Consider that, Sakurai.
I kind of held out hope that there was something I was missing to World of Light. That's why I finished it. Mm-hmm. So I was like, there's got to be something at the end to make all of this worth it. And there wasn't.
The Korok seed.
It was just
all over again.
It was. There was the cutscene and the menu music, which you're in the menu for, half a second.
Yeah. But it was Subspace Emissary was good because it wasn't. I mean, because you were playing the characters you always play, but you were put in a situation that was different from a normal match of Smash.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you had to run. It was a platforming game, and so it still used the strength of like the Smash Bros. Like fighting game engine. But it used it in a different way where you didn't feel like it was just, I'm just playing computers. But,
yeah.
And I think they went for that with World of Light, where it was like, oh, we're gonna have these the spirits, and they're gonna have crazy situations, and the matches are gonna have like wind blowing through them or electrified floors, which could be fun. But then they completely undermine it by giving you a spirit that makes you impervious to wind or impervious to... It's like...
Yeah.
All I have to do is push a button to auto-assign a spirit, and then it's a normal CPU match. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was one of those things that they handled both the Subspace Emissary and World of Light probably gameplay first. Like, what are fun, unique scenarios using the mechanics we already have? And then, like you said earlier, Steve, bad marketing as far as just how innovative these new segments of the game were. Like, because I agree with you, Brad, that they felt like they were like the flagship. These are the drawing elements to these new games.
Yeah, yeah. They really made it seem that way. And thank you, Kyle, for bringing back that trauma and that anger, because I forgot about that. Like,
you got it.
I put that deep somewhere because I was in college when that happened, and yeah, and that actually brought me to the Smash 2020, because I don't believe anything they say anymore because of what they did. But anyway, so this has been a great conversation, but it is time, my brothers, to wrap it up. My Super Agile Bros, to wrap it up.
Agreed.
as always, I want to say thank you, Kai. Thank you, Steve.
Always a pleasure.
For your time.
You're welcome.
For your thoughts. Even if your thoughts are wrong, because they are, I really do appreciate it.
Talking to Steve.
Yes, I'm talking to Steve and Kyle. And Kyle.
Steve who?
And Kyle. But really, as always, I really want to thank all of our listeners. To all the people that we named in the beginning. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We really, really appreciate it, and it drives us to be better. And we hope to be better every day. And please let us know what you'd like to see us talk about in the future, in the comments, via text or in the streets. We're ready.
Say it to my face.
Say it to my
Stay
face.
ready.
So thank you for listening. Appreciate everybody out there in the world wide web. And until next time, y'all take it easy. Peace.
Peace.